Crynhound Da, good afternoon. Today I'm here in South Wales. We have a beautiful view over the River Wye, and we can even see a little bit off into Gloucestershire in the mist. The spot that I'm in right now is called the Eagle's Nest Viewpoint, and I actually saw an eagle flying just a few moments ago. And we've got quite a lot of atmospheric mist, and then you get this beautiful atmospheric perspective as the landscape is lost into the sky. I think this is going to be a really interesting place to paint. So remember, please do subscribe to my YouTube channel and let's start painting.
I'm painting with oil paint onto a primed canvas that I've taped to a plywood panel and toned to a light dull brown. Using thinned down burnt umber paint, I'm sketching in a simple grid that will help me position the features of my composition onto the canvas. Now using a thinned down colour mix of burnt umber and turquoise, I'm starting to sketch in the underdrawing. I'm focusing on placing the big shapes of tonal value, such as the River Wye in the foreground, and the different levels of ground in the midground and the background where the River Severn is visible. As this brown tone, known as an imprimatura, is wet, as I applied it just before I began painting, I can take advantage of this by wiping it away to bring back the white of the canvas in the lightest areas, and this helps me get a quick visual impression of the composition before having to mix all the colours for each area. And here I'm just dipping a bit of my kitchen towel into my painting medium and then wiping it on the canvas to bring back the white of the canvas. I've now made a colour mix for the sky above the horizon using titanium white, cadmium yellow, Naples yellow and a touch of burnt umber to create a light, warm, golden hue. Notice how despite it being a clear day, I haven't added any blue to my colour mix for the sky, as there's a thick mist in front of the winter sun which is low in the sky, and it's creating a golden haze to the section of sky which is visible in my painting. I've also moved up to a slightly higher vantage point, as the area I'd started painting wasn't actually the eagle's nest, so now I am definitely in the eagle's nest. The view is pretty much the same, so I don't need to change much in the painting, but I do get a slightly better view of the River Severn in the distance. As the sun is on the right hand side, the sky is a bit brighter and warmer in colour temperature on this side, and as it gets further to the left, it takes on a bluer hue. This gradation is subtle, and I'm adding a bit of cerulean blue into the sky mix and gradually adding a bit more the further I get from the sun's position. Higher up on the sky on the left hand side, there's a bit of blue sky breaking through the mist, which I'm now adding in. Using a light, cool grey colour mix, I'm now painting in the distant bank of the River Severn. The shift in tonal value between this area and the sky and the river below it is very subtle, and I'm articulating the riverbank more through its cool colour temperature against the warm hue of the sky and the river, rather than through the tonal values, as I'm being careful not to overplay the tonal contrast in this area, as I want to capture the atmospheric perspective in the scene by saving the dark contrasts for the foreground. When painting, it's important to keep the bigger picture of the overall value range of the scene in mind, and I find squinting at the scene is a very useful thing to do, as it simplifies the tonal values and it does away with some of those small details which could prove distracting. Another useful tool to help you keep unity and control over your tonal values in your painting is to look at the scene in a black mirror, known commonly by artists in the 18th and 19th centuries as a grey glass or a clawed glass, after the great 17th century French landscape painter Claude Lorrain. The advantage to looking at your scene in a black mirror is that it simplifies and unifies the values without the distraction of colour. Also, by muting the small details, the mirror allows you to focus on the larger shapes and tonal contrasts, preventing you from getting lost in unnecessary intricacies. I also particularly like using the black mirror when painting towards the sun on a bright day like today, as the brightness of the sky can be quite dazzling and completely unattainable to truly capture in paint. Whereas when you look at the scene in the black mirror, the values are much more compressed and it's much more attainable to actually capture this effect with paint. And also I find just looking at the landscape in the black mirror, it gives it a more painterly appearance rather than looking out straight into nature where the scene can be a little bit overwhelming. So I definitely think using a black mirror can be really helpful, and in fact you don't even need to buy a black mirror. You can actually just use your phone, as the shiny black screen of your phone when turned off acts as a great black mirror or clawed glass. So definitely bear that in mind next time you're out landscape painting. And the travel writer and artist William Gilpin, who helped popularise the concept of the picturesque, explicitly recommended the use of the clawed glass. He wrote, "They give the object of nature a soft, mellow tinge, like the colouring of that master, Claude Lorrain, whose name they bear." And he actually wrote this in his 1782 book, Observations on the River Wye, which coincidentally is the exact same river that I'm painting here today. And as I paint, I'm working my way from the background to the foreground, and I'm focusing on distinguishing each layer to make a clear composition and capture the atmospheric perspective in the scene. The areas furthest away will be lighter in tonal value and bluer in colour, and each layer of the ground getting closer to the foreground will have more contrast and the colours will become a bit more chromatic. For this reason, I'm holding back on painting any really dark darks into the scene, as I'm saving these for the areas closest to me, which are the branches of the trees sheltering the eagle's nest where I'm painting from. And as the scene in front of me is covered in an atmospheric mist, the best way to capture this is by adding these dark branches overlapping the scene. However, I want to get the whole scene painted first, so that I don't need to paint around these branches, but rather I can paint them over the scene the way they are in nature. I'm now painting the dark reflection of the trees on the River Wye using a colour mix of burnt umber, cadmium yellow, and a small touch of turquoise and titanium white as well. I'm now painting the River Wye, where it winds behind the midground land and merges into the Severn estuary. I'm using the same light colour mix that I've used to paint the River Severn, and when planning my composition, I really wanted to make sure to fit this distinct curve of the River Wye where it meets the Severn into my painting, as it helps connect the background to the foreground by taking the viewer's eyes on a harmonious S-curve through the landscape. Here I'm sketching the hedges dividing the fields on the land next to the river. Just by placing these lines of the hedges in the right position, it will start to give the land a sense of three-dimensional form and perspective in the scene. I then mix the colours for the fields, varying the colour mix slightly for each field. As I paint these fields, I'm also painting the edges where the land starts to curve down towards the riverbank as a slightly darker green in order to give this mass of land a sense of form rather than it appearing completely flat. Now I'm massing in the foreground section of trees with a warm brown midtone that I can later refine by adding lighter sections as well as shadows. Using a colour mix of ultramarine blue, raw umber and a touch of cadmium yellow and alizarin crimson, I'm keying in the darkest trees and shadows in the foreground. Now using a fine brush and my darkest paint mix, which consists of ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, raw umber and a small touch of ivory black, I'm now painting in these branches in the foreground which overlap the view. The contrast between the dark values of these foreground branches really help to push the lighter values of the distant hills and the river further back in space, really adding to this sense of depth in the scene. I also add some light fine highlights to some of these branches using a fine brush and a colour mix of titanium white and yellow ochre, and as these branches are closest to me, the contrast and tonal value are strongest here.
I hope you enjoyed that video of me painting up here on the Eagle's Nest in South Wales. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Do subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you've got any comments, any questions, let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to hear them. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.